Georgia Whitmore wasn't expecting to spend her Saturday morning chasing a runaway toddler across Central Park in mismatched sneakers and a coffee-stained hoodie. "Wait. Sweetheart, stop, don't go near the pond," she shouted, bolting after the tiny blur of curls and denim overalls darting dangerously close to the water's edge. The little girl froze a few feet from the pond, wide-eyed, her bottom lip trembling. Georgia skidded to a stop beside her, crouched down, and gently took her hand. "Hey," Georgia said, catching her breath. "You okay? That was a close one." The child nodded slowly, her fingers curling tightly around Georgia's. "I dropped Mr. Bunny," she mumbled, pointing to a stuffed rabbit floating just out of reach in the shallow water. Georgia looked around. No frantic parent in sight. Her stomach tightened. "All right, hang tight." She grabbed a fallen branch, fished out the soggy bunny, and handed it over. "Mission accomplished." "Thank you," the girl whispered, hugging the rabbit to her chest. "Where's your mom or dad, sweetheart?" The little girl looked up at her, big brown eyes full of confusion. "Daddy was on the phone, then I saw a balloon and I ran." Georgia's heart dropped. "Okay. Let's find him, yeah." They didn't have to go far. A deep, frantic voice cut through the air. "Daisy," the girl's face lit up. "Daddy," Georgia stood up as a tall man in a dark navy coat rushed toward them, panic written all over his face. He dropped to his knees and scooped the girl into his arms. "Oh my God, Daisy, don't ever run off like that again. I was right behind you." I turned for 1 second and he looked up at Georgia. "You found her?" Georgia nodded. "She was near the pond. She's okay. Just scared." His eyes met hers, stormy gray, sharp and intense, and something in her chest shifted. "I can't thank you enough," he said, his voice thick. "I don't even want to think about what could have happened." "It's okay," she said, brushing hair from her face. "She just wanted her bunny." "We've all been there." He stood, still holding Daisy. "Still, thank you," Georgia nodded, suddenly aware of how ridiculous she looked, sweaty, flushed, and dressed like she'd lost a fight with her laundry basket. "Well, I should go," she said, stepping back. "Wait," he said, shifting Daisy to one arm. "I'm Nolan Fraser." She hesitated, then offered her hand. "Georgia Whitmore. Can I buy you a coffee as a thank you? I mean, you literally saved my daughter." She opened her mouth to refuse, but Daisy tugged at her dad's collar. "Daddy, can she come with us?" Georgia laughed. "Well, I can't say no to that." They walked to a nearby cafe, Daisy bouncing between them, clutching both their hands. Georgia couldn't help but smile. The man was gorgeous, tall, broad-shouldered, with that smooth, expensive-looking look about him, but he looked at his daughter like she hung the moon. Inside the cafe, Nolan ordered for all three of them without even asking the price. Georgia noticed his watch, sleek, probably worth more than her entire apartment, and the way the barista practically tripped over herself to serve him. "So what do you do?" she asked as they sat down. "I run a company," he said casually. "Tech stuff, boring." She raised an eyebrow. "That's vague," he shrugged. "You won't find it interesting. Try me." He smiled, then turned to Daisy, who was dunking a cookie into her milk. "She's the boss, I just follow orders." Georgia laughed again. Smart man. They talked for nearly an hour about nothing and everything. He was charming, but not in a rehearsed way. And when he looked at her, it wasn't like she was just some woman who helped his kid. It felt like he saw her. As they stood outside the cafe, Daisy tugged on Georgia's sleeve. "Can you come to the park with us again tomorrow?" Georgia hesitated. "I don't want to intrude, you wouldn't be," Nolan said. "Actually, we'd like that." She looked at him. "Are you asking me out, with your kid as backup?" He grinned. "Is it working?" She rolled her eyes, but she was smiling. "Maybe." They exchanged numbers old school, no texting, and parted ways. Georgia walked home with a smile she couldn't shake. She had no idea that Nolan Fraser wasn't just some hot single dad with a cute kid and a nice smile. He was a millionaire, but she'd learn that soon enough. Georgia hadn't expected to see Nolan Fraser again. Not really. People said things in the moment, thank yous, let's meet agains, but most of it faded with the day. That's why, when she spotted him the following afternoon at the park entrance, pacing beside a sleek black stroller and scanning the crowd, her heart gave a startled jolt. He looked different this time. Less rattled, more composed. He wore a gray cashmere coat over a cream sweater and slacks that looked like they'd never seen a wrinkle in their life. There was an edge of cool confidence in the way he stood, one hand resting on the stroller handle, the other tucked in his coat pocket. Daisy saw Georgia before he did and let out a delighted squeal. "Georgia!" The little girl barreled toward her, arms wide, and Georgia knelt instinctively, catching her in a warm hug. "You came," Daisy beamed up at her, cheeks flushed from the cold. "I said I would, didn't I?" Georgia stood, brushing a leaf from the child's hair. Nolan walked over, eyes unreadable. "You're punctual." "Well, I didn't want to keep my date waiting," Georgia said wryly, glancing down at Daisy, who was already tugging her toward a jungle gym. Nolan laughed, and something in his expression softened. "She's talked about you non-stop since yesterday." Georgia raised an eyebrow. "I hope she left out the part where I nearly tripped into the pond. She calls it the bunny rescue mission. You're officially a hero." They fell into step as Daisy raced ahead. It was a crisp afternoon, the sky a bright blue, the trees bare-limbed but beautiful in their starkness. Georgia kept her hands tucked into her coat pockets, still unsure why she'd actually come. She liked Daisy, of course, but Nolan, he was a different matter. He walked beside her in easy silence for a while, then said, "So, are you always that calm in a crisis?" She glanced at him. "You mean when a child nearly swan dives into a pond? I've worked in enough after-school programs to know the difference between a tantrum and a full-blown emergency." "That explains it," Nolan said. "You have that steady energy. I've been called a lot of things." "Steady's new." She tilted her head. "What about you? You didn't seem very tech stuff and boring yesterday." "I was distracted," he admitted. "And you were wearing a hoodie with a dinosaur on it. It threw me off." Georgia laughed. "It's vintage. Thank you very much." They reached the climbing structure where Daisy was clambering up the steps with the fearless confidence of a child who believed adults would always be there to catch her. "She's brave," Georgia said. "She's stubborn," Nolan replied. "Just like her mother." Georgia glanced at him, surprised by the edge in his voice. "You don't talk about her much. I don't talk about her at all." There was a beat of loaded silence. "Fair enough," Georgia said quietly. "It's not my business." Nolan looked at her then, really looked at her. "No, but you didn't ask out of nosiness. That's rare." The conversation shifted after that. Daisy pulled them into a game of tag, then insisted on building a leaf pile, then demanded a piggyback ride that Georgia graciously declined and Nolan reluctantly accepted. Beneath the laughter, though, there was a current running between Georgia and Nolan, something unsaid, but undeniable. Later, they sat on a bench while Daisy devoured a hot chocolate. Nolan handed Georgia a paper cup without asking what she wanted. It was exactly how she liked it, black, no sugar. "Let me guess," she said, sipping. "You researched my coffee order in your spare time?" "I guessed," he said. "But I'm a good guesser." She studied him. "You're strange," he grinned. "I'm aware." Then his phone buzzed. He glanced at it and his jaw tightened just slightly. Georgia didn't ask, but she noticed. "You always this glued to work?" she asked, nodding toward the phone. He hesitated. "It's hard not to be when people expect you to live and breathe it." Georgia tilted her head. "People or you?" He looked at her, the question landing harder than she intended. "Both, maybe," Daisy interrupted, tugging at Georgia's sleeve. "Can we go see the ducks?" Nolan stood, brushing crumbs from his coat. "I'll bring the stroller. Meet you by the pond." Georgia nodded and watched him walk off. The slow realization started to sink in, not just about who he was, but who he wasn't pretending to be. There was something about Nolan Fraser that didn't add up. His clothes, his manner, even the stroller, it was all too polished, but he'd never said anything directly. As they reached the pond, he was already waiting, gazing out over the water. She joined him, hands tucked into her coat again. "Are you always like this?" she asked suddenly. "Like what?" Hard to pin down, mysterious, a little too perfect. He turned toward her, eyebrow raised. "You think I'm perfect?" I said, "Too perfect. There's a difference." He smiled faintly, then glanced down at Daisy, who was tossing bits of bread to the ducks. I don't get to be mysterious often. Most women already know who I am before I say a word. Georgia narrowed her eyes. Why would they? He didn't answer. Instead, he pulled out his phone again, frowned at something on the screen, then tucked it away. I'm sorry, he said. I really didn't mean for this to be complicated. Are we complicated? Not yet, he said, but we could be. Georgia crossed her arms. You're not making a lot of sense, Nolan. He looked at her, something unreadable flickering behind his eyes. There's a lot you don't know about me. Then tell me. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I will. When? Soon. Daisy ran up, breaking the tension. I'm hungry again, she announced. Nolan ruffled her hair. Let's go then. They walked toward the car lot, Georgia expecting a modest sedan or maybe a well-kept SUV. But when Nolan stopped beside a gleaming black Bentley with custom plates and opened the rear door for Daisy, her breath caught. He didn't say anything, just looked at her calmly, letting the moment hang. I should have guessed, she said slowly. You didn't, he replied. That's why I asked you to coffee. Georgia hesitated. Then, with a half smile, she slid into the passenger seat. Let's see where this goes then. Nolan smiled, closed her door gently, and circled to his side. The engine purred to life, and the city blurred past the windows as the Bentley pulled away, leaving behind the leaf-strewn park, and the version of Georgia's life that would never be the same again. Georgia stood in the middle of the penthouse, trying not to gape. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a glittering view of Manhattan's skyline. Pale marble floors stretched beneath her feet. A fireplace, flickering quietly, glowed beneath a massive abstract painting that probably cost more than her college education. The air smelled faintly of cedar, and something more elusive, something expensive. She didn't belong here. Not in this glass and gold world where even the silence felt curated. You're staring, Nolan said behind her. I'm trying not to, she replied, turning to face him. But you brought me to a Bond villain's lair, so... He chuckled, setting down his keys on a sleek tray near the door. I told you it might be complicated. No, you said it could be. There's a difference, she said, walking toward the floor-to-ceiling windows. You didn't mention you lived in a museum. I live here because it's quiet, he said simply. And because Daisy's school is 5 minutes away. Georgia glanced over her shoulder. What do you even do, Nolan? I mean, really. He crossed the room, picked up a remote, and lowered the blinds with a quiet hum. I started a software company in college, built something people couldn't ignore. Then sold it for more than I thought possible. Now I invest in other people's ideas. She raised an eyebrow. So basically, you bought yourself time. I bought myself freedom, he said. But time. That's still the one thing I can't seem to control. She watched him for a moment, then wandered over to a low table where a stack of children's books lay in a neat pile beside a tiny pink backpack. Where's Daisy? With her nanny. I didn't want her here until you agreed to be, her eyes narrowed. Is this some kind of pitch? No, it's a dinner, he said, stepping into the open kitchen and taking out 2 glasses. I wanted to cook, she blinked. You cook, I had to learn. Daisy won't eat anything from a box if she catches me making it. Georgia crossed her arms. So you're a tech mogul with a private chef's skill set and a 5-year-old food critic for a daughter. He handed her a glass of wine. You can laugh, but I've burned more grilled cheese sandwiches than I care to admit. She sipped. The wine was smooth, dry, and clearly aged far beyond her usual $20 bottle. Still, she didn't let that distract her. You could have told me, she said, setting the glass down, who you were. What you had. I didn't want that to matter, he replied, and I didn't think it would. But then yesterday you got in the car and I realized it already does. She leaned against the counter, feeling the weight of the moment. You don't know me, no. But I want to. She looked at him, at the way the low lights caught the angle of his jaw and the quiet conflict behind his eyes. You didn't ask me here just to impress me. No, he said. I asked you here because I haven't stopped thinking about you since the park. And I don't usually make space for people in my life, but with you I want to. Georgia stared at him for a long beat, then pointed toward the stove. All right, Fraser, show me what you've got. He grinned and turned back to the counter. Chicken marsala. And before you ask, yes, I made it from scratch. As he cooked, she wandered the open space, taking in the quiet signs of life hidden beneath the elegance: a crayon drawing on the fridge, a forgotten hair tie on the arm of the couch, a purple boot peeking out from behind a pillar. "This place looks different now," she said softly. He didn't turn. "Because you're seeing what matters." When they sat down to eat, Nolan lit a single candle in the center of the table. It wasn't flashy, just warm, intimate. Georgia took a bite and blinked. "This is actually good." He looked up. "Surprised? I expected you to order in and pretend you made it." "I used to do that," he admitted. "Didn't work. Daisy knows the difference." She laughed, then quieted. "Is she okay with everything?" He set his fork down. "It's been a rough couple of years. Her mother and I weren't married, but we were together. Until we weren't. She didn't want the spotlight, didn't want any of this. And you did." "I didn't want to be invisible," he said. "I built something from nothing. I thought success would make it easier. But it just made the cracks harder to ignore." Georgia didn't interrupt. She let him speak because it was the first time he wasn't filtering his words. "She left when Daisy was 3, he continued. "Moved to London, doesn't call, doesn't write, Daisy doesn't even ask anymore. That's a lot," Georgia said quietly. He nodded once. "I don't bring people around her, not unless I think it matters." She looked at him across the table. "And you think this does?" "I know it does." The air shifted between them, not with heat or impulse, but something deeper, something steady. "I'm not looking for a rescue," she said after a moment, "and I'm not impressed by money." "I didn't assume you were," he said, "but I won't pretend I'm not used to people being impressed." Georgia stood, walking to the window, her wine glass in hand. The city glowed beneath her. She turned back to him. "Okay," she said. "I'll stay for dessert." He rose too. "Good, because you haven't tried my tiramisu yet." She watched him move to the fridge and thought, this shouldn't be real, but it was. And it was happening fast, maybe too fast, but it felt right. When he returned with 2 small glass dishes topped with cocoa, she accepted hers with a quiet smile. "I'm still not convinced this isn't takeout," she teased. "You'll know the truth after the first bite," he said. She did. And she didn't say another word until the bowl was empty. Later, he walked her to the private elevator. As she stepped inside, he caught her hand. "This doesn't have to end here." She met his gaze. "No, but slow down. I like you better when you're not trying to convince me of anything." He nodded, released her hand. "Then I'll wait." The doors closed, and Georgia leaned against the mirrored wall, heart racing. She had just stepped into a world she didn't belong to. But for the first time in a long time, she wanted to see where it would take her. Georgia stepped into the mirrored lobby of Nolan's building for the second time that week, her nerves twisted tighter than the knot in her scarf. This time, she'd been invited not for dinner, not for wine, not even for a date. It was Daisy's school fundraiser, and Nolan had insisted she come as his guest. "You won't be the only one without a designer gown," he'd said on the phone, his voice low, persuasive. "But I will be the only one who took the subway to get there." He hadn't argued. He'd only said, "I'll send a car." Now, as the elevator opened onto the penthouse, she was greeted not by Nolan but by a woman in a tailored suit with a headset in her ear. "Miss Whitmore?" "Yes, right this way." She was led into a room she hadn't seen before, smaller, darker, with floor-to-ceiling closets. Dresses hung in neat rows, shoes displayed like artwork, and a vanity glowed under warm lights. A garment bag hung on a hook with a small note pinned to it, "For you." Georgia stared at it, then turned to the woman. "What is this?" "Mr. Fraser asked me to help you get ready. He said he hoped you wouldn't mind." "I wasn't expecting," he said, "you'd say that." The dress inside was midnight blue, sleek and understated, with a subtle shimmer that caught the light without screaming for attention. Nothing bold, nothing showy, just elegance in fabric form. She dressed in silence. When she emerged, the woman handed her a pair of silver heels and a small clutch. "He's waiting downstairs." Georgia descended the staircase slowly, her pulse picking up with every step. Nolan stood at the base, dressed in a dark suit, his tie already loosened. He looked up when she reached the last step. I didn't think you'd wear it, he said quietly. I almost didn't, she replied. Then I realized you probably had a backup plan involving a helicopter and a backup dress. Wrong, he said, just the dress. She gave him a look. You arranged an entire room for this. No, he said. That room already existed, I just finally had a reason to open it. They arrived at the fundraiser in a black sedan, not the Bentley. Georgia noted it quietly. Nolan didn't mention it. The event was held in a private rooftop garden atop a museum downtown strung with hundreds of hanging lights. Soft live music drifting through the air, and servers weaving through the crowd with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Georgia had never been to anything like it. The closest she'd come to black tie was chaperoning a middle school prom. But here, people moved like they were born for this, every gesture graceful, every smile calculated. Nolan kept his hand on her back as they moved through the crowd. He introduced her to people by name, never once mentioning her job, her background, or how they met. He let her stand beside him, not behind him. You're making this bearable, she whispered as they approached another couple in formal wear. Then it's working, he murmured back. The man they were speaking with, older, silver-haired, and clearly influential, clapped Nolan on the shoulder. Your daughter's auction items already pulling the highest bid. A tea party with Daisy Fraser, who would have guessed? She's got more charm than I do, Nolan said. And apparently more business sense, the man laughed, then turned to Georgia. And you are Georgia Whitmore, she said, offering her hand before Nolan could answer. The man blinked, surprised by her confidence. Fraser's new head of PR? No, Nolan said, his voice even. She's someone important to me. The man raised an eyebrow but said nothing else. As he moved away, Georgia touched Nolan's arm. You didn't need to do that. I wasn't going to let someone label you. Is that what this is? She asked. Labels now, he turned toward her, his expression unreadable. I'm trying not to mess this up. She opened her mouth to respond, but another voice cut through the music. Excuse me, Mr. Fraser, a woman in a slate gray dress approached, her smile polite but her tone clipped. Miss Whitmore, she said, turning to Georgia. I'm Olivia, Daisy's teacher. Georgia straightened. Oh, hi, it's nice to meet you. I've heard quite a bit about you, Olivia said. Daisy talks about you constantly. She does. She says you're the one who taught her how to make a leaf crown. Georgia laughed softly. That was a very chaotic afternoon. She also said you told her not to be afraid of asking questions. Even if the grown-ups didn't have answers. Georgia looked to Nolan, surprised. He met her gaze silently. She listens, Olivia said. To you. After the teacher walked away, Georgia turned to Nolan. What was that? What, you've been letting her talk about me at school? I haven't told her what we are, he said, but I haven't stopped her from remembering what matters. Georgia took a slow breath. This is happening fast. Life doesn't ask for permission, he said. It just moves. When the event ended, Nolan didn't take her straight home. Instead, he asked the driver to make one stop. The car pulled up in front of a quiet brownstone in Gramercy Park. Georgia looked at it, confused. What is this? He stepped out first, then offered his hand. Come see. Inside, the space was warm, lived in, nothing like his penthouse. Wooden floors, a fireplace that had seen better days, walls lined with mismatched bookshelves. This was the first place I lived after the company sold, he said. It's real. I kept it, he said. Because I needed one place that reminded me of who I was before everything changed. He turned toward her. I don't want to be the man who forgets what matters. You reminded me. Georgia hesitated, her voice quiet. I didn't come into this looking for anything, I know. And I'm not interested in being someone's decoration. You never were. She looked around the room, then back at him. I'm scared, she admitted. I am too. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small box, not velvet, not flashy, just simple. I'm not asking a question, he said. Not yet, but I am asking for a promise. He opened the box. Inside was a delicate gold chain with a tiny charm shaped like a leaf. For the park, he said, where it started. She stared at it, her throat tight. You remember everything? I remember you. She let him fasten it around her neck. The charm rested just above her collarbone, light as breath. Then she leaned in and kissed him, not because it was expected, not because the moment demanded it, but because it felt right. When they pulled apart, she whispered, "You don't have to ask, I'm already in." And that was it. No speeches, no fireworks. Just two people, standing in the quiet of a life they hadn't planned but were choosing anyway, together. Georgia tugged the edge of her coat tighter as she stepped out of the community center, the late March air still stubbornly clinging to winter's chill. The kids' art showcase had run over, and she'd stayed to help clean. It was instinctive now, staying behind, making sure everything was folded, sorted, and ready for the next day. She didn't even notice the black SUV idling at the curb until the driver stepped out and opened the door. "Miss Whitmore," he nodded politely. "Mr. Fraser asked that I bring you home." She blinked. "I didn't know I had a chauffeur now." "Only when requested," he said, waiting. She hesitated for a beat, then climbed in. The car was warm, the leather seats soft and welcoming. She half expected to be driven to the penthouse, but instead they turned uptown toward the brownstone. Her heart gave a slow, surprised beat when she saw the glow of light through the front windows. Inside, the scent of roasted garlic and lemon drifted from the kitchen. Nolan stood at the stove, sleeves rolled up, a tea towel slung over his shoulder. "I was going to call," she said, slipping off her shoes in the entryway. "I figured you'd be late," he said without turning. "You never leave those kids unless someone pushes you out the door." She crossed the space and leaned against the counter. "I didn't know you'd be here tonight. I wasn't supposed to be." He plated something that looked suspiciously like homemade risotto and set it on the table. "But the meeting in Chicago wrapped early. You flew back just for this?" "No," he said, walking over with two plates. "I flew back for you." They sat, and for a while the only sounds were clinking forks and the soft jazz humming from the speakers. She watched him between bites. There was something different about him tonight, not tense, not guarded, settled. "I talked to someone today," he said after a moment, "my lawyer, about custody papers." Her fork paused. "Why? I want to make sure if something ever happens to me, Daisy stays with someone who won't treat her like a story or a legacy." Georgia set her fork down. "You're talking about a will." "I'm talking about trust," he said, his voice even. "And the person I trust the most is you." Her chest tightened. "That's a lot." "It's not a proposal," he said gently. "It's a step, one I've thought about every day for the last 2 months. She reached across the table and took his hand. "Then I think I'm ready for a step 2. He looked up. "Yeah, I gave notice at the center." He stared. "You're leaving, not the kids," she said quickly. "I'm starting something new, a program for under-resourced schools, mobile workshops, art therapy, creative development. I already have 2 grants pending." His eyes lit, pride flickering across his face. "You're building something?" "I learned from the best," she said. "Though I'll admit I don't have a private jet in my budget." He laughed, the sound low and warm. "Maybe we'll save that for phase 2. The doorbell rang, interrupting them. Nolan frowned. "Are you expecting someone?" She shook her head. He rose, disappearing down the hall. A moment later, he returned with Daisy, bleary-eyed in fuzzy pajamas, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "I thought she was with the nanny," Georgia said, surprised. "She was," Nolan said, "but she had a nightmare. Asked for you." Daisy went to Georgia without hesitation, climbing into her lap and curling close. "I dreamed you left and didn't come back." "I'm right here," Georgia whispered, stroking her hair. "Not going anywhere." Nolan watched them, something shifting behind his eyes, then he stepped forward and knelt beside them. "She's not just here tonight," he said softly. "She's here for good." Daisy looked up. "Promise?" Nolan glanced at Georgia. "Only if she says yes." Georgia blinked. "To what?" He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box, not flashy, not dramatic, just simple, honest. He opened it. Inside was a ring, delicate gold with a single emerald-cut diamond. Classic, timeless. "I wasn't going to do this tonight," he said. "I had a whole plan involving a rooftop and string lights and probably a piano, but this feels better, more like us." She stared at him, heart thudding. "You're serious?" "I want you," he said. "Not just beside me, but with me, through everything. I want mornings with you, art shows, tantrums, late-night takeout, grocery lists, all of it. I want our life." "Will you marry me, Georgia?" She looked down at Daisy, whose small fingers were wrapped tightly around hers, then she looked back at Nolan. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, 1,000 times." He slid the ring onto her finger and she leaned forward, kissing him as Daisy giggled between them. Later, after Daisy was asleep upstairs and the dishes were forgotten in the sink, Georgia stood on the front porch wrapped in Nolan's coat, watching the city lights glow in the distance. He joined her, slipping his arms around her from behind. "I bought this place the year I thought I lost everything," he said quietly. "Turns out I was just getting ready to find you." She turned in his arms. "You've already given me more than I ever imagined. I haven't even started yet." They kissed beneath the quiet streetlight, the world soft around them. Inside, the house was no longer just his. It was theirs. And in the weeks that followed, they built a life not of extravagance, but of intention. Georgia launched her program with Nolan as her silent investor. Daisy started calling her mom without being asked, and the brownstone, once a relic of Nolan's past, became the heart of a new beginning. The wedding came quietly, held in the park where they first met. Daisy scattered flower petals with careful precision. Nolan wore the same tie from that first fundraiser. Georgia wore a dress she'd chosen herself, no garment bags, no surprise stylists, just her, exactly as she wanted to be. There were no reporters, no spotlights, just family, friends, and a string quartet playing softly beneath the trees. When they danced, Nolan whispered in her ear, "Still think I'm too perfect?" She smiled against his chest. "No, just perfect for me," and she meant it. Every word. Because the man she'd met by a pond wasn't a fantasy. He was real, complicated, beautifully flawed, and hers forever.